How's it going, YouTube? My name's Ninja 7, your favorite WoW healing content creator. And back in season 1, you guys really liked when I made a tier list like this. Basically, kind of my opinions on what is the easiest healer. But I think the reason why season 1's video resonated with you guys is because I don't just put my opinions into account. I try to put myself into the shoes of any type of player, whether you're new to healing or new to WoW or you're experienced, and try to mix it all together and come up with a standardized tier list. So without further ado, let's talk about the tiers, and then we're going to rank each healer on what I believe to be just flat out the easiest healer in the game for season 2. So starting off, we have the top tier, legit easy. I'm talking you can multi-box WoW and Roblox and heal just fine. I don't know if any healers are going to land in this tier because this is like the easiest of easy. But then below that, we have what you probably would imagine is easy. It can be complex, don't get me wrong. Some healers are just flatline easy, but can have some very stressful and difficult moments to navigate. Most of the healers probably would land here, the ones that you're probably thinking of to be the easiest. But then neutral is just like it has some mechanics that are difficult to learn, to pick up, but it also has some that are easy, but they kind of cancel each other out, and it's about a 50-50 spec. Outside of that, there are the hard healers, ones that just really struggle to pilot. Like a new player picking this spec up to pilot would have a difficult time. It really would, but then an advanced player probably could pick it up and learn very quickly. But then here is the avoid if stupid. I would land in this tier. All the healers would land here except for Mistweaver Monk for me. But this is a spec that is just very difficult. I don't recommend new players like try to pick it up and learn as their first healer. Honestly, I would, if you're looking for just an easy healer to get into playing, if a healer lands in this tier, personally, I would not recommend that to newer players. Just dip your toes in the other specs, get your feet wet in healing, or at least in WoW, and then play this as like your second spec if you want to challenge. So without further ado, let's get into this. I have these randomized in a random order, and let's just go ahead and start ranking things. So first up, we have Holy Priest. Holy Priest, traditionally, I believe, when it was first designed, was designed to be the template spec. Like, this was designed to be the easiest spec in the game, and throughout the years, it's mostly maintained that. This is traditionally known as a whack-a-mole healer. Health bar goes down, we heal it up. That's how the spec operates, that's how it works. And in the past, I do believe we've seen easier iterations, but I don't think it strayed too far from that narrative of just being the template healer. But the reason why we're going to be putting it in the easy but can get weird tier, which is probably going to surprise some of you guys, you probably think this is the easiest healer, but hear me out, trust me. We're in an age of World of Warcraft where all of the healers are starting to develop their kits more and more, meaning that, like, whereas a healer would have only one major cooldown a year ago, they probably have 5. So if a big mechanic hits your party, you have 5 options to choose from. You can mix and match. You can stack on top of each other to heal through big damage onto your party. Holy Priest has not had that evolution yet, at least not in my eyes, especially with the removal of something like Salve and Raid. That's a different story, but right now in Mythic Plus, they really only have like Halo and Apotheosis, whereas all of these other healers, well, at least most of them, have like upwards of 5 buttons they can choose from. But Holy Priest really just has Apotheosis on a 2-minute cooldown. Now, Apotheosis is already kind of one of the more difficult major cooldowns because it does change what you do, how you play, how you should behave during that window of having that buff. Whereas something like Tranquility or Revival just heal when you press the heal button, Apotheosis does change what you do. And that alone it makes it one of the more complex healer cooldowns to navigate or to pick up and learn and play the rotation. However, one thing that has made this so much easier to learn and to experience as a new healer in season 2 is the talent that makes your heals instant cast after popping Apotheosis. Now you can pop it on the move and just spray and pray health bars. You can pop it when there's major damage happening and you might be a couple globals behind the healing. You can Serenity, heal, Serenity. Like, you can do some major instant healing, which I believe makes this so much easier for newer healers, maybe people who aren't experienced with healing or with WoW in general. When your health bars are all low and you are behind, you now have a little bit easier of a time to top them up in that window. But like I said earlier, is the spec right now, the way it's balanced, is you're kind of a bit lackluster outside of that window, and that can be very hard to navigate as a healer. Like, when should I use this major cooldown? I'm afraid to use it because if I use it now and need it later, then I won't have it. Stuff like that, decisions like that can make it get a bit weird at certain points. On top of that, you do have some mechanics that can be a little like hard to learn as a newer healer or a newer player picking up a new spec, like shaving time off of your cooldowns by casting certain spells. That can get a little iffy, but that's been around for a while and it's really not too difficult. But now with like Renew taking a bunch of seconds off of your Sanctify, if you take this talent, like there just is a little bit more complexity than there was in season one. But once again, it's one of the easier healers, guys. It's made to be easy, in my opinion. So it lands an easy, but can get a bit weird. Next up, let's move on to Resto Druid. Now, Resto Druid traditionally has landed very low on this list. Like, if you were making an easy tier list back in the day, this has pretty much stayed down here in the lower category, but they made some changes that I do believe have moved it up in recent history, especially coming into season two. The main one being the mastery change. But essentially, what they did is they made you, the player, get more effectiveness on your heals when you're in a situation where you don't have as many hots on each player. Which, for a newer player or someone who's not used to the rhythm of something like Resto Druid, not used to constantly blanketing hots to prepare for potential incoming damage, if you're one of those players, this makes it so much easier, because if big AoE damage starts to hit your party in Mythic Plus and you just don't have your rejuve spread, maybe you don't have your efflorescence down yet, like, you're just unprepared, which most newer players looking for an easy healer would be in those situations. Now, all of a sudden, if you just apply efflorescence, maybe Swiftmend one of the people that's taking big damage that you can Swiftmend, and then do a big wild growth, and then start casting regrowths to keep health bars up. That's going to do so much more healing nowadays than it would have in the past because of these mastery changes. That alone is one thing, but that's not it. That's not like enough to make this go up a tier, in my opinion. But also, I've already mentioned regrowth, and this is kind of one of the big talking points from last season's too, because they made these changes coming into last season where your spot heal is now just more powerful. It takes up more design space, more power space in your kit. Therefore, if you don't have enough hots out and you're just someone who gets caught just spamming regrowths, which is like a noob trap of the past, it just heals a lot more now. Regrowth really chunks, especially if you can get those hots applied. So I'm not saying that that's how you should play, but I'm just saying, like, realistically, like, guys, if you are new to Resto Druid, if you've ever picked up this spec for the first time, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There are times where you just get caught with your pants down with no hots out, and you're just like, ah, crap. Here we go. People are dying. Just hopefully it's not me. Pop it offensive. So yeah, Resto Druid just has struggled historically with those moments, but nowadays you just have a little bit better of a time. You have like one more tool. You also can have 2 charges of Swiftmend, 2 charges of Nature's Swiftness. Those giant spot heals in an instant, like instant shock heals, really make the spec a lot easier to play. You can kind of like toggle how easy you want the spec to be. Also, you can cat weave, which is kind of like the higher skill cap version of the spec to push a little bit more damage. Or you can like owl weave, which is super chill, super easy. So that's why I think like you can really slide this spec however you want it. I don't think it can ever get to legit easy. It's not. It's a very difficult spec with difficult mechanics, but you can really slide this spec up and down this tier list depending on how you want to play it. And I think that kind of just says neutral. You do have to take a few global cooldowns, a few casts before the damage hits, like you always have with Resto Druid, to prepare your hots so that you can heal through it, because you don't just spot heal left and right. That's not what this spec does. So that does make it difficult. Also, if you factor in the fact that you should technically be weaving in and out of one of your 2 damage specs depending on how your build works, that also can make it a little bit more weird, because like, say for example, you cast a Wrath because you think damage isn't about to hit, and then all of a sudden as you're casting that Wrath, your Hunter stands in a swirly and your tank takes a smack, and like you really need to pop Convoke. Then you could start your Convoke in your balance form if you're running fluid form. It's just, there's a lot going on. Okay, there is a lot going on, but it's admittedly a lot easier than it has been in the past. Now, Mistweaver, if you asked me back in like Dragonflight Season season 3, I think it was, when we were just spinning to win. It was just the easiest spec. I main Mistweaver Monk. You guys know this about me, but I admit it used to be super easy. So we've seen it in very easy iterations. We've also seen it in some pretty hard ones. I don't think it's ever been a Void of Stupid, but we've seen it in some hard ones just because it is a melee spec, so you do have to deal with melee mechanics. There's a lot more frontals to dodge, there's more swirlies, there's just crap in melee. You also have to worry about weaving. Like, you aren't just, Mist Weaver, you're Mist Weaver. So you're weaving in casts while on the move, while in melee dodging those mechanics. And it's been hard, it's been easy in the past. Nowadays, I do think it is in the easy but can get weird. And this might make some of you guys upset. Some of you might be thinking this is a hard spec just because it's a melee spec that has to cast every now and then. Like, some of you might be thinking that. But realistically, like, as a Mistweaver main, someone who makes content about the spec, this is one of the easier iterations that we've seen. It's not quite as like headbutt the keyboard and have a good time and like heal infinitely as it was back when we were just spinning to win all the time. But with Jade Empowerment, the talent that makes your Crackling Jade Lightning just go giga damage, do so much damage, thus doing a ton of healing thanks to Jade Fire Teachings and Ancient Teachings. Since we have that, like, we have one of the strongest healing cooldowns up every 30 seconds. It's crazy. And it's not like you have to use it every 30 seconds. You can use Thunder Focus Tea now and store up a charge of Jade Empowerment and use it later once that damage comes in. So it has something on a super low cooldown that is literally just press one button and watch it do the healing. And that to me is kind of like a cheesy way to do healing. Like, I can admit that even as a Mistweaver. If you're a Mistweaver main and you're watching this, getting mad at me right now, like, be real. That is a little corny of a mechanic. Like, if you're like a Pres Evoker main and you're watching this video and you're hearing me dog on Mistweavers, you're probably like rooting me on, hopefully at least. But we can call a spade a spade. Crackling Jade Lightning right now is just making the spec super easy. You also have Shayloons, you have Chi-Ji, you have Revival, you can have Celestial Conduit. Like, you have so many tools at your disposal that it just makes it very easy to deal with any amount of incoming damage at almost any given time. The one thing that does kind of make this a little tricky is there are so many passives. I think it's easy to overlook how many passives that you have to understand as a monk to play it well. And then on top of that, one of those passives is your hero talent tree that you do take if you don't take Celestial Conduit, which is Master of Harmony, and that is a little bit complex. Like, the amount of times that people ask me a day even how it works is insane. But it's how you do big damage as a Mistweaver Monk, and yeah, this is an easy iteration of Mistweaver, but I don't think it's the easiest because, like, this is going to sound like such a first world Mistweaver problem, but we have so many cooldowns right now, or like so many buttons available to us at all times. You do kind of struggle to find the order to press them in, which is like, you see what I mean? It's like literally a first world problem, but all of that thing, taking all of that away from the complexity of Mistweaver Monk, you have to understand this is a very complex spec. It has a lot of moving parts, a lot going on with its mechanics. However, its rotation a lot of times, like 8 times out of 10 at least, is just Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick, Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick, Rising Sun Kick, Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick. So very easy spec. If you're a new player, you could start with this. If you want to be in melee, in the action, punching and kicking the enemies, you'll have a good time. Moving on to Holy Paladin, the other melee healer, its counterpart, it plays very similarly. Like, I've been playing my Holy Paladin quite a bit this past week during the Emissary of War quest line. And it really does play pretty similarly to how Mistweavers play, which I don't think I've ever felt that way. Because Holy Paladin, your melee punches and kicks, your Crusader Strikes, your Judgment, which isn't really melee, those are on a cooldown. And they do have a lot of different buttons that you cycle. You have like small ones like Holy Prism, you have your Crusader or your Avenging Wrath, depending on whichever one you take, like whichever build you go. You also have like Divine Toll. You have so many different cooldowns that you're cycling. Except they're all less impactful, it feels like, than Mistweaver. So it does have this problem that Mistweaver doesn't, whereas the player you do kind of have to stack cooldowns up on top of each other more often. Whereas like with Mistweaver, I could Crackling Jade Lightning through this damage instance, but with Holy Paladin, I might need to Beacon of Virtue plus like Holy Prism plus like Divine Toll. You have to stack and make decisions a little bit better on your Holy Paladin to perform at the same level. And all of that to say, it's just a little bit more complex. If not, it's kind of hard right now. Like a spot where it's kind of hard to explain. Like any of Mistweaver's cooldowns can cover almost any mechanics. Like that's not really true, but like Chi-Ji, Crackling Jade Lightning, they can heal through a bunch of damage. But the same is not true for Holy Paladins, and they're kind of doing the same things. Like they have kind of similar rotations, except you do have to heal, like actually manually heal health bars more often. So your mouse might be moving on and off of health bars depending on how you play a bit more often. Um, you have a lot more like utility tools than healing tools compared to Mistweaver Monk. So it's trying to find the best uses for those so that you don't have to use as many healing cooldowns can be a bit tricky. You feel really safe depending on which build you go. You feel really safe whenever you pop your wings. So like when you pop Avenging Wrath, you feel so safe. The whole party feels so safe. It's a huge healing boost, especially if you're running Herald of the Sun. But if not, if you're still running like last season's talent build or something like it, the Avenging Crusader, if you're trying to force it, you still feel pretty safe during that, just a lot less safe than you did back in season one. But outside of that, like Divine Toll is very good with your tier set, very good with your tier set, but that's about it. It doesn't really heal. It's just so hard to cover all of the different damage profiles that this season is throwing at us. Like Swamp Face is a perfect example. Constant rot damage. You kind of just run out of resources on Holy Paladin, and it gets a little scary. It does. It really does. And it's really hard to pilot effectively because you have to be very smart about your cooldowns. So that's why I would throw it in the hard category. Look, it also kind of is whack-a-mole like Holy Priest. All of that to say it's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's like for a new player, someone picking up the spec for the first time, you might overcommit cooldowns, you might undercommit cooldowns. There's really an in-between that you have to find, and that takes experience and practice on the spec of knowing what to throw at a certain mechanic to heal it without wasting too much so you can throw enough at the next mechanic to heal it. And that is where I think this spec just struggles compared to Mistweaver from a player perspective, especially a new player perspective, new to healing especially. But a very weird alternative to that is Resto Shaman. Resto Shaman, it heals kind of similarly to Holy Paladin, where you have all of these like minor cooldowns plus some major cooldowns that you can mix and match and stack on top of each other. But the difference is Resto Shaman is just constantly spewing out more healing, whereas Holy Paladin sends a lot of their healing in chunks, and it does make it a lot easier to where you can just have hots rolling, have your totems down, rolling, healing your allies. You cast a chain heal, boom, it just zips around and heals a few more people. It is just a lot easier. And on top of that, you do also have the same, like similar utility, but your utility is more aggressive utility, meaning that you can stun the mob. So if I see a caster casting or multiple windups going off, I can stun that, which is much more intuitive to a newer player than like I can sack that person or I can immune that person to that damage. And on top of that, I've already mentioned wind up, which is where those guys spin around and like saw blade you in a floodgate. You don't have to stand in melee with this spec. So you get to sit there and whack-a-mole health bars just like Holy Paladin does. You're very reactive with the healing, but you have a lot of proactive healing constantly like fountaining. You basically have these totems that are fonts of healing that are constantly healing. You're healing Stream Totem, you're healing Tide Totem, which is a cooldown. Your Surging Totem just rains down healing on your allies. You have your Riptide Hot pouring into people. You have Earth Shield just pouring healing into yourself in the tank or yourself in a squishy. You just have so much like rolling hots that it really can make it easier as long as you get those things down. Like we're running up to a pack, I put down my Surging Totem, it's just going to heal this whole pack, do some great passive damage. I put my Earth Shield on myself in the tank at the beginning of the dungeon. I don't have to think about that anymore, which in the past you had to keep refreshing that, but nowadays you don't. And then as long as I'm pressing Riptide on someone before if I'm at max charges, Then all I have to do is just whack-a-mole health bars. Do I need to AoE heal? We press chain heal, and then boom, you're getting more chain heal healing thanks to your totems and totemic. Do I need to do spot healing? Healing surge. Do I have enough time to cast a healing wave? Yeah, okay, sure, I'll throw a healing wave out instead of a healing surge to reserve some mana. Where this spec can get weird or complex is if you're doing a dungeon like Cinder Brew, where you're always like chain pulling, you're pulling through rooms and chain pulling in that first room. You can start to run out of mana. This does have a pretty severe, and in my experience, and from what I've heard from some guildies and some friends that play the spec, you can encounter some mana issues, and it does get very stressful when you do encounter that, and especially if you're a newer player, you don't really know when is okay to stop and drink. But as long as you come stocked up with some food, then you should be fine. If you have a mage in the group, you should be fine. You can just drink whenever you can, eat that food, get that mana back, and that really is not an issue. But on top of all of that, like, one of your downsides to being Resto Shaman is that you don't have a tank external. You have Earth Shield, but that's Earth Shield, right? You don't really have a tank external, which can make it a little bit more easy to understand. You kind of just watch your tank's health bar as opposed to knowing what pack they're pulling, so that you know when to heal them as opposed to when to put your mitigation on them, which is pretty nice. However, if you ever do get caught with your pants down, like maybe one person just takes a walloping, maybe your tank is just going through it, or if everyone's just going through it, you put down Spirit Link Totem, and now everyone's health is distributed. That one person that's about to die is now just as well off as everyone else. You have a panic button. You have excellent spot heals. You have constant throughput coming in. It really does have the makings of it's legit easy. I mean, guys, I just healed like a plus 11 or something with my 620 shaman, and it wasn't even close. Like we like two chested or three chested it, and it's just like this is just an easy spec. I think currently in its current state, it's easy. It does have a lot going on. Don't get me wrong. You can take all these like different utility buttons if you need to really min max it, but at its baseline level, if you're someone just picking up the spec, needing to only learn like the few core buttons, this spec can get a lot done with those few core buttons and has a lot of passive healing to help you out, basically. So that's why I think if any spec's gonna make it into legit easy, I'm talking you can multi-box WoW and Roblox and be just fine. It has to be Resto Shaman, especially currently. They've tried to make it harder. They try to make it more complex by removing one of your cooldowns from the cycle, but that doesn't really make it harder. You know, in my opinion, it doesn't make it harder. It just is legit easy, in my opinion. Now, let's move on to Disc Priest. And guys, this is probably gonna get me canceled. Please don't try to cancel me over this, but Disc Priest historically, at its core, it has some very difficult mechanics. It always lands here hard or avoid if stupid. It is a very difficult spec to learn, admittedly. However, recently, I would have even done this season 1. I should have said this season 1, but I was a little scared of you Disc Priest players, if I'm being honest. Y'all are just cooler than me, and I'm afraid to put my opinions out there for you guys. But Disc Priest, I'm just going to say it. It's easy. It's easy, and it's not just because of how good it is. Like right now, it's very solid, does big damage, does big healing, kind of like Mistweaver. They're both very good, but I'm talking about the core elements, like what you as a player goes through in like a random 2500 key. As a Disc Priest player, you realistically press like the same few button sequences over and over. Same with Mistweaver Monk, admittedly. That you press the same few button sequences over and over to do the healing. Like you pop your Mind Bender, you Mind Blast, you Penance, and then you just smite until Penance is up again. And you smite, you press Radiance when those atonements fall off. Like, don't get me wrong, the mechanics of the spec are super complex, but the way that the spec is designed currently, they even tried to remove a lot of the complexity from the spec, and I think they did a great job. I think the spec is, in my opinion, in just a better place right now than it was in the past. But part of that is from it just becoming easier than it has been in the past. And like I said, its rotation is what's really causing it to be bumped up right now. Yes, if someone takes a big smack, then You could be caught with like not as many tools as the other specs. Like if someone takes a smack on your monk, you just life cocoon them or you vivify them, boom, they're fine. You soothing mist them, they're fine. But priest doesn't really have tools for that. One thing that's keeping this, honestly, that's keeping this from the legit easy tier is that a lot of its mechanics are balanced around its mitigations. And being a newer healer, being new to WoW, or like I said, just new to healing in general, or even just new to Disc Priest, learning to play around those mitigations is what makes it very hard, especially right at least nowadays. That's what's still keeping this down, keeping it maybe even in neutral. But I'm going to keep it up here in easy, because if you're doing like +8s, if you're just doing +8s and you play Disc Priest, you just, whenever damage starts happening, you Mindbender, press those 3 buttons, and you're good to go. Especially now, like I would have thought on season 1, one of the things that was actually keeping this down was your atonement management. It was a lot harder to make sure you have atonements when you need them, or make sure you have enough radiance charges at difficult times. So you were having to manage your atonements with like spot heals, like Power Word Shield, or renewing people every now and then to just reapply those atonements. But now with Evangelism extending those atonements, now with your Smite spam extending those atonements, that really is not an issue. You can bridge the gap between your radiances to basically always have a radiance before that AoE happens. I'm sorry, guys. To me, I know it's a complex spec. It's just that if you pick it up and play it and literally look at a damage rotation, or look at your rotation, like look at a one-page guide of the spec, you can perform at a good enough level to get like 2500. And I think that that makes it an easy spec. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. Please don't cancel me over this. But that's just my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. Now, to close out this video, let's talk about Preservation of Evoker. And they've done a lot of changes to bring back Flame Shaper like more in line for season 1. And I've seen some people play it and like it. I've seen some people play Chrono Warden, people like that too. But in general, this is another spec that just based on its core mechanics usually lands down here. And this is an example of a spec that I don't think the changes they've made coming from season 1 have moved it up a tier. I still think it's at least hard, possibly even I would recommend avoiding this if you're stupid like me, because it's just, it is difficult. You play with time. Basically, you have to plan out your echoes before damage, so you can use your temporal anomaly to plan out those echoes before damage. So one thing about Preservation of Evoker is, a lot like Paladin, it historically, or at least in recent history, has been a spec that's designed around having a couple of different shorter cooldowns that are designed to be stacked on top of each other, mix and matched, or to solo certain mechanics. Like you have your Dream Breath, your Spirit Bloom, your Verdant Embrace, your Temporal Anomaly. You have all of these buttons that are on lower cooldowns that you have to cycle and stack and yeah, mix and match. That is, once again, more difficult, especially when they don't do as much healing as a Crackling Jade Lightning. That's the same concept, or a Shayloon's Gift, that's the same concept. It does get pretty difficult learning the sequences, or learning how to order things, especially when you bring Stasis into the mix. Stasis being like your main cooldown in a Mythic Plus environment, where you store up 3 helpful spells, and then you can hold on to them for I think like 30 seconds, and then within that 30 seconds you can press the button again to unleash those 3 spells. So learning all of the different sequences, or the sequences of 3 spells that you can store within a stasis, in itself is very difficult. I'm sure there's like a long flow chart that you can make of all the different possibilities, especially when you play Flame Shaper, because then you add in a different button that's very good to add into that mix. Add on top of all of that, them and Holy Paladin admittedly are on the lower end of the throughput spectrum. Just, I mean, I don't like to talk about power level in these videos, but when you're talking, once you start to get down into these more complex, harder specs, one thing that does cause them to struggle is that they do struggle to do the healing. So you do feel more compelled to throw more buttons at certain mechanics, just like with Holy Paladin, and a newer player can get caught in that trap a ton. And then add on top of that, take what I just said about Holy Paladin, add on top of that the complexity of the timing of things, and then you really just have a very difficult spec to pilot as someone who's newer to healing or newer to WoW. Even if you're someone who has healed in the past and maybe you even have an understanding of all the dungeon mechanics this season, if you're picking up your Evoker main for the first time in a while, it just is very difficult to navigate. That's the perfect word that I can think of as difficult to navigate, because you have to find the different branching tree of possibilities that you could press and pick which one is best, or at least one of the few that's best to go with. On top of all of that, if you're just pugging and pushing like casually and just looking for the easiest healer to play, you're probably playing with like-minded people, and this spec does not thrive in those environments where people are ignoring mechanics, are ignoring the optimal plays in most situations. If you have a DPS, for example, that is standing way over there, and you have another DPS that's standing way over there, two of your main rotational slash cooldown buttons are frontals. And it's like, you have to, do I breathe on this guy or do I breathe on this guy? So it does have just a lot of things that make it like you have so much more decision points than any other healer spec, in my opinion. Whereas, like, these healers have defined rotations that you maintain until something comes up. Preservation Evoker takes what Resto Druid does, where they're always having to prep or plan ahead. But on top of that, you have these other added complexities like spacing, timing, that do just make it difficult. And none of the changes coming into Season 2 have really changed that. So that's going to do it for this video. This is my which healer is the easiest tier list. In my opinion, it is still Resto Shaman, and then followed very closely by the Priest specs. Although Holy Priest struggles a little bit more to deal with the healing than Disc Priest, I just think Disc Priest's rotation is pretty simple. Same with Mistweaver. The cooldowns on Mistweaver are very easy to understand. Resto Druid still has all of its complex, hot mechanics, but things have gotten a lot easier to understand, and newer players can get a lot more healing out of less hots on people nowadays. Holy Paladin still has all of its buttons that you need to learn, and learn how to stack them on top of each other. Same with Preservation Evoker, but Holy Paladin doesn't really have healer utility. You have Paladin utility, which can be harder for someone who just wants to show up and heal. And then you also have to deal with melee like Mistweaver, but you have a harder time with that. You also have less impactful cooldowns than Mistweaver, so learning how to manage those can be a lot higher or bigger of a learning curve. And then same with Preservation Evoker, except you still have those spacing issues. You still have a very complex rotation, and bringing Flame Shaper back into the mix has only really, amplified that to an extent. So guys, tell me what you think. Tell me how wrong I am, how wrong you think I am. I'm sticking by this tier list, especially if I'm just talking about what's easiest. If I were talking about what's best, this tier list would be totally different. So please don't look at this tier list and think this is what I'm saying is the best healer. This is just, if you just want to casually play and want the easiest healer, here's my picks. Start from the top, work your way down. Guys, thank you so much for all the support lately. I really appreciate you all. I'm having so much fun in Season 2, partly because you guys are showing up to the streams, making them so much fun. So guys, check me out on twitch.tv/elvinninja7 or here on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed so you can see when I go live, which is every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I'm looking to add more days to that. But guys, thank you so much for hanging out, for watching this video. Once again, let me know all of your comments down below, what you guys think about this tier list, what you would move around, what you would put in each tier. Did I name these tiers okay? I like to always kind of throw some curveballs in the namings, but guys, I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care, guys.